Here we are. Yeah. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here this morning. And Sarah, thank you for being here.
Well, you're welcome.
We've known each other for a long time.
Yes, we have.
My entire life.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how that works.
Sarah happens to be my aunt. Amongst other things.
Full disclosure.
Full disclosure. But is now living at Brother Village.
Yes.
After spending many years on the West Coast and other places and things like that. But I will let you introduce yourself and I will let you jump into things except to say thank you. And we're talking about Kingian nonviolence today.
Oh, is that what we're talking about?
Shoot. All right. Yeah.
Hi, yes, I recently moved from San Diego, California to Lancaster. I moved into Brethren Village with the hopes that I would be able to spend some time with my mom, who's 98. And that hope is happening. And then my brother's also there. You might know him, Ed Haldeman. He's at Hempfield. And I don't know, sometimes I think he's all over the district. But anyway, that's my brother. Jason was out at Laverne College, and we got to connect while he was out there, being the only family member. You know, we spent a lot of holidays together. But as I said, I recently retired from San Diego First Church of the Brethren, the church in San Diego, and that was a 17-year ministry. So it's been quite a transition to go from that to this. During that time, the last 5 years, 6 years really, I connected with Honor Peace and their work around Kingian nonviolence. And when I took their level 1 training course, I'm a level 2 trainer for Kingian nonviolence. And I'm also now operating as the chief organizer for the Thousand Brethren Project, which I'm assuming most of you have heard of. And if not, give me a minute and I'll get back to that, because I'm a verbal processor. So I've started here and I've ended up here and I really should be here. And so I took the Kingian level 1 training, and it was amazing. And I'm going to be sharing a lot quickly of that to do with you today with a 16-hour class. And it was really one of the first times that I found something that actually put what I had been taught in my faith into action. Because the Church of the Brethren, a lot of times we are told about peace and we learn about peace, but that action phase in some of our churches is not. I recognize Jean. Oh, you're here too. I'm recognizing you from my past. Okay, sorry, verbal processor. And it really was an opportunity for me to put my faith into a understanding of how to be active in creative and functional ways, as opposed to what I had been taught, which was a lot of conflict avoidance. And that seems to be a good way for the Church of the Brethren in most places and spaces to avoid conflict. So Jason asked me to be here today to share a little bit of Kingian nonviolence and also my own personal aspects and relationship to it. So that's a start. I am hoping to, oh, hi folks, wait, oh my goodness, I forgot, you can't see me. I'm so sorry. Hi, because I wasn't on screen, they can hear me talking, but they can't see me. So my apologies for that. Oh, thank you. I'm happy. Great. So in the next nigh on to 45 minutes, I'm gonna chain me to the podium. I am also someone who walks a lot. So I'll try and remain here. My apologies to you that are joining us on Zoom. If I step out, I will probably catch myself and come back in. But let me apologize in advance for my lack of awareness for not being in this on screen for you all.
They can see you on the other screen.
They can see me on the other screen?
Yeah. Just to help you feel better.
Let me just apologize for my total lack of knowing what's going on. All right, anyhow, this is what I hope to do in the next 45 minutes is Intro Kingian Nonviolence, Building and Living the Beloved Kingdom Together in 45 minutes or less. This we typically do in 2 hours or 3, or if you take the full course, it's a 16-hour training in Kingian Nonviolence. So we're going to take a look at what the pillars are very quickly. We're going to look at what a definition of violence is. We're going to look at non-violence versus non-violence. And then one of the social dynamics of Kingian nonviolence is what I call the aggression conciliation flip. And for me, this was amazing in the way I thought about conflict and in the way I now try and do my best at looking at conflict. And then we're going to take a quick look at the 6 principles. And if there's any time after that, we'll have some Q&A. And I'm not guaranteeing that there's time. Feel free during the conversation to ask questions if you have any. All right, here we go. Grab onto your seat. Here we are. Okay, so we at On Earth Peace, and me as a consultant working with On Earth Peace, we have 4 pillars of Kingian nonviolence. The first pillar is, why in the world do you call it Kingian? And I think a lot of folks think we call it Kingian because of King, Martin Luther King, and the work that he did in the civil rights movement. While that's partially correct, the thing I want us to remember is King was a rabble-rouser, and he was not someone who a lot of people enjoyed during that time because he agitated and he created spaces for messy things to happen. And it's called Kingian because of that. But in addition to that, it's called Kingian because it brings back all of that civil rights stuff. It brings back all of the people in that time, not only King, but those he worked with and those he worked, some folks would say, against. So the second pillar, we say it's a philosophy and a methodology. Not only do we learn theory, not only do we learn what King did and why King did it, we also learn a methodology that's connected with that basic thing. So we have what we call the will and the skill. Let me go into this. It's a way of life and a form of a strategy. So we have steps that you can follow, and we have principles that are the foundation and the base. And then it is approach to organizing. It's an approach to conflict. It gives us ways to think about conflict and engage in conflict and allow us to be creative in conflict and use tools for social change. And then it's an approach to organizing let's move. Let's find where your cursor is. We'll move this over so folks can see that. It's an approach to organizing. It's a shift in thinking about how we work with one another. And our goal is not to work in an us and them environment, but a kind of environment where we turn what we know as enemies or antagonists for us, or people that we're against. We try and work and forming allies and relationships. We're committed to reconciliation, and that's not a warm, fuzzy, oh, everything's okay reconciliation. The reconciliation that recognizes the tension in which we live, but we can agree to move forward in whatever we're moving toward. So oftentimes I think we think reconciliation is where everything's hunky-dory, peachy cream, and we love each other and there's no tension. And this is not what Kingian nonviolence is. It's an opportunity for us to move forward together. We have social dynamics that we work with in that. So, first question, what word comes to mind when you hear the word conflict?
Yeah.
Disagreement.
Vietnam was called a conflict.
Oh, yes, it was called a conflict, wasn't it? Yes, that's the whole
Yeah, I
Kingian.
know.
Yes, okay.
A
Come on.
brethren response would be bad.
Very good. A brother in response could be that bad. What do you? War. Okay.
Unfulfilled expectations.
Oh, unfulfilled expectations. Great. Great. So for Kingian nonviolence, and for one of the pieces that kind of turned my understanding of conflict, it only took 50 years, but one of the turnings for my understanding of conflict was conflict's natural. It happens. Most of the time, you wake up in the morning, you don't expect conflict, but before you even get to the breakfast table, there could be conflict. It's natural. It's a part of life. It's inevitable. There's no way you're going to go through a day without conflict. I don't care if it's you get out of bed first and the kids get out of bed second, and there's bathroom issues. I don't care if it's toilet paper issues. I don't care if it's who's using the car. Conflict is inevitable, gonna be there. And then conflict has history. It always has history. And oftentimes I think that's one of the things we forget, that when we're in a conflict situation, there's history. And to be curious about what that history is something that we need to be aware of. And then we're going to move into violence. I think oftentimes it's good to have common ground for the terminology we're using. So if you could complete this sentence, violence is, how would you complete that sentence?
Response to conflict.
A response to conflict. Okay. A failure.
Failure.
A failure. Okay. Just violence is a failure. All right.
Physical, emotional, or psychological harm.
Okay.
Fear-based.
Fear-based conflict. Violence is fear-based. Definitely.
Destructive.
Destructive. Yes. Yes. So in Kingian nonviolence, Sue, yes, I recognize the face. In Kingian nonviolence, we go real short. Violence is emotional or physical harm. Psychological is definitely a part of that. And we invite people to remember that violence is determined in emotional and physical and psychological harm. Violence is determined about the person by the person who's receiving the action, not by you who are doing it. You may have all the best intentions in the world, but it can be received, and in that you're looking at the violence because it's the person who received. Because you don't know maybe their history, you don't know what they have been a part of. So violence is emotional or physical harm. Moving right along pretty quickly here. When I was a kid, we used to get those highlight magazines. You remember those highlights? Maybe you give them for your grandkids. And I remember, Goofus and Galleons and the hidden pictures and Find the Difference. And those are the places I always went first. So I'm asking to use your observation skills. What do you see? What's the difference?
Something that's more active.
Okay. Okay. I'll agree with that.
Could you just repeat that?
I'm sorry, he said the second is more active. But I'm just asking here on this picture, what's the difference between those two words? The hyphen. Right. The hyphen is the difference. And in Kingian nonviolence, we say that is the best, most highlighted difference that we need to be aware of. I was president of the San Diego Peace Resource Center, and I had a member of my board who always insisted on putting the hyphen in there. And it simply drove me crazy. Why? Because the hyphen says we're not violent. which is true. However, that not violent is more as an adjective describing how you are. And nonviolence without the adjective, without the hyphen, is exactly what was mentioned here. It's much more active. So Kazahagu, who is the author of Healing Resistance and a guru in nonviolence, he gives an example of this. And he says he was sitting up in his room one day, second floor, and out in the crossroads that's just in front of his apartment, he heard two cars come together, a crash, and the guys, who both were guys driving, came out and started at each other. And the bystanders gathered, watching. The bystanders, you could say, were nonviolent. They were not participating in the violence that was going on between these two gentlemen. Kazu said he got up, ran down the steps, and entered that with nonviolence and separated the two individuals. That's the active nonviolence in engaging with the violence toward a resolution, reconciliation, or justice. So in nonviolence, with the non-hyphen, we're working at how do you engage violence to be able to move toward justice, to be able to move toward a reconciliation, a space and place where you can move forward together. So that's the big difference, is if we're being not violent and we're being non-hyphen violent, which I think is the way I was taught, we're just kind of avoiding because we don't want to create conflict, or we don't want to create violence. So the non-hyphen, adjective, non-violence, engaging, you could probably say it's a verb. So non-violence, this comes from Kazu Haga from Healing Resistance, his book. Non-violence is not about what you're not to do. And I think oftentimes we're trained, well, you don't do this, you don't do that, you don't do the other thing, because we're a peaceful church. I don't think Jesus was about not doing. I think Jesus was about engaging. Nonviolence is not about what not to do. It is about what you are going to do about the violence and injustice we see in our own hearts, in our homes, in our neighborhoods, and society at large. It's active. It's being in the gap, perhaps. It's standing in solidarity with. It is being a part of direct actions that lead to back to negotiations and lead to change in our society. In Kingian, this was another thing that really hit me. The whole concept of what's the difference between negative peace and positive peace. In one of King's sermons, when peace becomes obnoxious, he talks about what peace means. And he tells the story in that sermon of this woman named Aubryn Lucy. Perhaps you heard of her. She was the first Black woman admitted to the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And as she came to matriculate there, and as she entered her first class, there were incredible riots that hit the campus. White supremacists, anybody who felt like people of color were not to be there or educated at all, were on campus and were protesting rather violently. There were people who jumped on her car. The night after she was admitted, they came and they jumped on her car. There were, you can't see on that side again, but there are protests that are going on, flags being burned, KKK, very, very much present. And the newspaper, once Auburn Lucy was asked to leave for her own good, right? Her own good, anyway, we won't go there, we'll do more of that in the 16 hours. But the newspaper said things are quiet in Tuscaloosa today. There is peace, they should have that in quotes, peace on the campus of the University of Alabama. So you can think about that and wonder what kind of peace was that? Definitely I think it was a peace that swept everything under the rug. It was a peace that, whoops, going backwards here. It was a peace that was very negative in that peace didn't work toward justice. It simply said Auburn Lucy was the problem. So once we got rid of her, the campus is so nice again. We can live in peace. But it did nothing for the justice that Auburn Lucy deserved and that people of color deserved. So there's this negative piece, and I thought I had a slide, it may be coming up later, but there's this understanding that negative piece doesn't change anything. Positive, it might be a little more messy, might be a little bit, no, it won't be a little bit, it'll be a lot more messy. But there will be transition. And as that we move toward finding a peace that brings justice to everyone.
The word engagement comes to my mind.
Yes.
You are engaged in positive peace.
Right.
There's no engagement.
Correct. And you're engaged in a way that works toward justice. Yeah, you're not sweeping it under the rug. And there's a lot of folks that would agree with that quote. There is peace. I mean, there was no more violence going on at that particular time in that particular space. But if you look at the emotional, physical, psychological harm that Aubrey Lucy and all the people of color were experiencing in that expulsion, white supremacy ran true and won in that event. Go ahead, Ralph.
Several years ago, Pastor Craig preached a sermon in which the major illustration was toxic niceness versus kindness. Toxic niceness is appeasement. Let's love each other, kumbaya moment, just cover it up. That's nice. Toxic. Kindness speaks the truth.
Yeah.
Allows space for the truth. That's kind. That's the ultimate kindness toward the person in the situation.
Yeah. And I think in Kingian nonviolence, we will talk about Jesus' agapic love. Or that agapic energy that Jesus had that was exactly that kind of kindness. I don't know, and maybe you would know of an instance where Jesus swept conflict under the rug. Not something that I can put to any of the gospel stories. I think Jesus demonstrated the kind of kindness that was there. Okay, here we go. This is the aggression conciliation list that means so much to me, and I think is enlightening for folks who move through Kingian nonviolence. I won't be doing it as intensely as we do in our 16-hour, but let me say, in Kingian nonviolence, we have social dynamics that we work with. We work with aggression conciliation, which is what I'm about to explain to you. We work with top down, bottom up, which is an organizing principle that helps us lead everybody forward as we move into working for justice. And we look at leadership dynamics and training, and how we can be nonviolent leaders. All of these, in some respect, come together in this split that I'm about to share. We also work with what's called dialectical thinking, which you all might be aware of, where you have a thesis and an antithesis, and you list values of each of those, you synthesize those, and then you come up with an analysis, and then you come up with a synthesized thought that everyone hopefully can move forward with. I think as middle kids, sometimes we did that automatically. You had an older brother and a younger sister, and as the middle kid, you heard this and you heard this, and then you tried to find a way forward. Sometimes I think that was my experience as a middle child. But anyway, we have in the aggression conciliation flip, we are thinking about a situation that is conflictual or tension. So if you just want to bring one of those into your brain, not that you have a lot of them, but think of one that you are aware of and are a part of. So there are 1, 2, 3, 4, there are 5 key components to this conciliation flip. So we're going to go through them very quickly. The first is aggression. When you're involved in a conflict, there's that rage that's kind of building up, that anger that builds up, right? I mean, I don't know how many people go right into a conflict and sit back and go, ah, although that's one of the things you should do, maybe. But aggression is that hot energy that rises up within us and says, I want to do something. It's a valuable tool to help us connect with that righteous indignation that moves us forward. So there's that energy that's coming up. And it needs to be released. It's got to be released one way or the other. If it's not released, it's just going to stay there and it's just going to keep building, and then there's going to be a huge blow up. And that's part of the conflict. If it's not addressed, it just continues to boil until boom, and then it's like, now what do you do? So the second is the conciliation. That's the empathy and emotion that connects and moves us forward. There's that, we want to connect with people. We want to connect with the issues that are going on. And we want to use our emotional energy. The third one are the conditions. The conditions are those policies and practices, the systems that hold things together that need to be changed. Those are the conditions. Now, if you think of that example that you have in your brain, you can probably identify your aggression. You can probably find and identify the conciliation, that emotion that's there that wants you to connect with what's going on. And you can think of the conditions. We may not frequently think of conditions. Why? I think because we move right to people. We have difficulty oftentimes separating people from issues because the people are the issues. But the people that I'm talking about are the ones who are participating in behaviors that need change. So you think about that situation that you have in your brain. You know the people that have to change that need to either be removed, changed, or whatever, in order for the behaviors to change. Because if you get rid of them, if you get rid of Aubrey and Lucy, you get rid of the problem. In Kingian nonviolence, what we want to do, we say that most of the time our rage is formulated toward people. I don't know how many times when I've been in a conflict, people say, well, if so-and-so, if so-and-so, if so-and-so, everything would be fine. I would totally disagree with that, but there you go. Our aggression is formulated toward people, and our conciliation to the conditions is formulated through charity. So a lot of times we do wonderful things in the hopes that we change things, but we're still moving toward charity. We have homeless meals. They're significant and important, but they don't do a lot to change policy. They take care of the people, but they don't do a lot to change policy. And it's the systems that need to change, because the systems are what bring up the people that are part of that. So from rage, the aggression going from the people, you end up with violence, this physical, emotional harm. And from the conciliation to the conditions, the charity just keeps the status quo. Nothing changes. And we end up, and we will, and the poor will always be. So what we like to think about in Kingian nonviolence is how, and the leaders of Kingian nonviolence are thinking, how do you take the aggression and take that anger and rage and focus it on the positive and the system, so that you can get systemic change and not just bash people. That doesn't help. And then we invite folks to take your charity and that agapic energy and that agapic love of Jesus and focus it towards the people. So that, what does Valerie Carr say? When you see someone, and she, in her book, See No Stranger, you are a person, a part of me that I have not yet met. These people are a part of us. We've met them, we don't like them, but they're a part of us. And you'll see that in the principles of Kingian nonviolence. So that agape love of Jesus going to those people to say, you are a part of me. God's body. Christ's love. Go ahead.
This is interesting because I work at Phil Haven. There's a sign on the wall that says, empathy cannot be accessed unless we're regulated and safe. So those people, we need them to have empathy back, but they can't a lot of times because they're not feeling safe. So the conciliation and charity toward them helps them feel safe, which will maybe help them find empathy, but we can't expect them to start it if they don't feel safe.
Right. Well, and the systems that they live in have shaped them in certain ways. So in order for them to feel safe, to even begin this kind of two-way street, there's such a building of trust and energy and love that needs to happen before, maybe this is there. And that's where changing a system that engages people in that agapic energy of love and recognizing that everyone is a part of, in Kingian nonviolence, the beloved community. And in Christian language, perhaps the kingdom of God, the reign of God. So as then the fifth component is our nonviolent leadership. And the nonviolent leadership is what channels and keeps all of this flowing. So that when you bash up and I'm working with someone who says, but oh my gosh, if we only could get rid of so-and-so. As a nonviolent leader, and it's often not popular, but as a nonviolent leader, my response would be, but that person is a part of our family. Go ahead.
Would you rather wait? Like, should I
No,
wait
go
for
ahead.
the comments?
No, go ahead.
I find it very interesting.
Mhm.
I find it very difficult to listen to a racist,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't even want to talk to them.
Mm-hmm.
So I will admit that. So this module or process, I should say, seems geared more to where there is some common, both experience and empathy and sympathy. So I wonder if you've had experience with that.
Yes, I have. I've attended lots of gay parades that have protesters. And I've also been a part of, racism interactions. And it's not easy. It's not easy, and I don't necessarily want to talk to racist bigots either. However, if I am a truly nonviolent activist and person, Jesus calls me. I think this is me. Jesus calls me to engage. And one of the ways I've been able to engage is with curiosity. Because as we move into the second part of this morning, and I'm working a little bit with de-escalation, and we'll talk more about some of this in that workshop. But one of the things I find that's helpful for me and difficult for me is to move into conversations that are curious. I can't change them. I don't know how many conversations I've had at Direct Action where I am face to face with someone who is, well, police, counter protesters. I'm face to face with them. And what I need to do is center myself and be curious. If I have a time to wonder with them. Listening to someone doesn't mean you agree with them. Doesn't mean that you condone what they're doing. But listening to them shares that they're valued individual and they're a part of the beloved kingdom, the beloved community. Because no one is outside of the beloved in Kingian nonviolence. No one. Go ahead.
And I think that we need to, in dealing with someone like that, we need to recognize the conditions from which they have developed.
Yeah.
So if it's an evangelical Christian kind of background that they have, then it's that system that has formed them.
Right. And you're not going to change them.
That's right.
I have tried, and I think I've learned that is out of my control. That's God's area of work. I mean, what I can do is be present. This will go into the escalation workshop, but I can listen. I can do my best to care for that individual because they are coming from some kind of system.
Some kind of trauma, probably.
Well, yeah. Systems usually generate trauma, whether it's good or bad. It's, again, trauma in many ways just is. Conflict is neutral. And how you react to that conflict is what kind of turns the scales. So, I think one of the most difficult things for me was to be involved in a legal battle in racism and have the board I served on accused of racism, and to try not to demonize those that accused us, and to continue to love and work with and try and translate that, transform that. It's not easy. I don't know that Jesus ever promised us easy. I don't think Jesus ever promised to take us out of any of our trials. What I do believe that Jesus does is invites us to walk along with the people in an accompaniment ministry. And Jesus will be right there with us in our communities and in our faith. And It's a lot. It's a lot. But that rage against people is just going to go to violence. I don't know of any space and place where it doesn't. And that is not what Jesus is calling us to. See, we help ourselves and our communities channel our aggressions and channel our empathies. And we flip what we normally do. Because people brought up in systems or dealing with traumas, they need to be heard and loved and cared for in order to move forward. All right. So, wait, let's go back. So, how we do all of this in Kingian nonviolence finds its heart and soul in what we call the will and the skill. The will of nonviolence is the principles. And what has been codified in the will and skill of Kingian nonviolence was codified by David Jensen, who worked with King, was in a BDS and worked with King, and Dr. Bernard Lafayette, who also was working with King. And the last words that Dr. King said to Bernard Lafayette was when Bernard asked him, "What's our next steps?" King said, "What we're doing has to be institutionalized and internationalized." And Dr. Bernard Lafayette got together with Dave Jensen and said, "Let's do it." So they codified what we have as our curriculum, and they took and looked at what King was doing and what King did and what they knew of King, and they brought together the 6 principles and the curriculum that we use in the 16 hours. So the will of nonviolence is what we call the 6 principles. These are the 6 principles. I can't go into them. Typically in a 16-hour, these will be dealt with in about an hour of time to an hour and a half. So what I'm going to do is quickly go through them and give you Sarah's version of MLK's version. So and maybe a little bit of Jesus. Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. There is no way you can be nonviolent and not be courageous. Do you know how much courage it takes to stand up to your family? Do you know how much courage it takes to stand up to your parents? To a racist? To a bigot? To a white supremacist? Nonviolence is a way of life for courageous people. Beloved community is the framework for the future. This is the now but not yet thing of the kingdom of God, I think. It's that beloved community that includes everyone, whether you want them to be included or whether they want to be included. They're there. They are a part of us. And we need to love them. We don't need to like it. And love, I'm not talking about, the warm, gushy, I want to hug you love. I'm talking about that love that it just invites us to recognize the Christ within them and recognize their value and their somebodyness. They're somebody. Attack forces of evil, not persons doing evil. Attack the systems, the conditions. Don't attack people. Because in Kingian nonviolence, we want to work with those persons that are on the opposite side. Because that's the only way anything gets done. Because if you work, if you don't, this is where you're at. And this is a great way for peace. But this moving forward and attacking the forces of evil is really where change comes. Accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve the goal. For me, this is the passion loop. This is the Passion Week, where Jesus accepted the suffering, did not retaliate, and did not let his disciples retaliate. Without retaliation, for the sake of the cause to achieve the goal. What was Jesus' goal? Long goal, reconciliation of humanity with God. Short goal, I don't know, maybe just to be able to bring life to the disciples who were growing up tremendously.
Dale Brown always taught that was the cross, specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. And for us as nonviolent practitioners, that means that I have to be willing to accept whatever comes my way. I got fired from a congregation because I was LGBT supportive. They told me I was wrong. I told them, sorry, I feel pretty good. You know, God is leading me in a direction that you're not yet able to see. Didn't like that answer. Okay. I lost my ministry. So accept the suffering without retaliation. I love those people. They are amazing people. The systems in which they were brought up, this was back in the 80s, the system in which they were brought up said that LGBTQ people were not people. We've come a little bit out of that. I'd like to see us go a whole lot more, but accept suffering without retaliation for the sake of the cause to achieve a goal. You'll see that in the civil rights movement. Lunch counters. The training of those individuals had to sit at those lunch counters to accept the cigarette butts, the spitting, the hitting. In fact, if you could not agree to be nonviolent, you weren't able to be there.
Right.
You were not able to be there. So if you're doing anything at the church, and I understand there's something coming up at the fair that we're working with this afternoon a little bit, if you cannot be nonviolent, don't be there, please. Because if you're violent, that is what's going to hit the news. And that is not going to help a cause. Not at all. And you've seen it all the time. You've seen it at Ferguson. You've seen it in Chicago. You've seen it Charlotte. You've seen it all over the country. Avoid internal violence of the spirit as well as external physical violence. We know that we won't hit people. But the internal violence we do with name calling, with labeling, with, you could name others, I'm sure. That's the internal violence that we don't want to do because it's physical, emotional, psychological harm. And if that is the kind of violence we're doing, we have, our credibility is questioned. It's hard. So I know I'm not going to hit somebody, but I also have to know that I'm not going to hate them. Because that's what Jesus invites us to do. Love our enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Because our ultimate goal is to win allies and build the beloved community until we have justice for all. The universe is on the side of justice. In our workshops, I think this is the hardest for folks to grasp. And this is, for me, this is the faith aspect. I have to believe that the universe is the side of justice. I have to believe that I am being pulled forward by a God of love. And that love will bind us all together at some place. Maybe not all as Christians, you know, because we're such an inclusive, we need to be such an inclusive, diverse world. You know, I am an interfaith person. So for me, the universe is on the side of justice involves everything. Earth, just everything. And it is on the side of justice. That's where God is taking us. Or maybe more like for me, it would be leading us. I'm not sure that I'm a person who believes that God has this plan in my life and it's unfolding because I'm too much of a rebel. And I argue with God all the time. But the universe is on the side of justice. And it's moving. Very slow. But it's moving. And we, as Kingian Nonviolent and as a nonviolent church, nonviolent community, we can move it forward as we take a look at those and we live this discipleship of Jesus. Then we go through, see, we go through these. We would go through all of these. There's steps. I don't know that I have too much to say about those at this point because this is another hour. But the steps in Kingian Nonviolence, I've seen this congregation utilizing in the worksheet that is going out to the folks working at the fair. You've had information gathering, you've had education, personal commitment. You have to ask yourself, can I do this? Can I be nonviolent? If somebody comes at me, can I actually see them as a person I've not yet met that is in God's kingdom and that I can love? Maybe not. Then maybe you're not the right person to meet that person. Then there's the negotiations that we hear about, the going back and forth to agree and disagree and agree and disagree, to move forward in the justice action, direct action. We hear a lot about direct action. Amazingly, in Kingian Nonviolence, this is the step you don't have to have. Because the function of direct action is to send you back into negotiation. And we have so much focus on this direct action that I think it's lost its power. Because you're out protesting everything. It's all, and also Kingian Nonviolence is strategic. So you just don't say, oh, next Saturday, we're going to go. And then reconciliation, that moving forward toward together. Go ahead.
That is exactly what Dr. Martin Luther King did. The stereotype is the action.
Yes.
There was always negotiation ahead of time, always. The march occurred only after everything else broke down.
Yes.
That was repeatedly the system.
Yeah. Every time Martin Luther King, you know, and you don't hear a lot of the behind the scenes work. All you hear and see is the actions, the Children's March, the Selmas, the Montgomery, all of the direct actions. And people assume that there's so much power there. The only reason they have any power is because all of this that goes behind. And the women, oh, don't even let me get started on how the women were important there. You hardly ever hear about women in this. So 16 hours, you'd hear some of that. But those are the steps that that we utilize. And continue. Dun, 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 dun. I'm sorry, I'm an Enneagram 7, so I have to have joy in everything. Okay. And then I don't have time, but we do have the dialectical thinking that would be going into and a lot more mapping and all that kind of stuff. But I'll close with this quote because I think I'm pretty close.
6 minutes.
Okay. Power without love is reckless and abusive. Love without power is sentimental and anemic. That's Martin Luther King. And I think that's kind of encapsulates where this agapic energy is that Martin Luther King and that we as trainers and I personally have come to understand that it really is power and love. And God, Jesus calls us to that love. And it isn't going to be easy. God didn't promise a rose garden unless you're looking at the thorns. But God did promise to be with us and to walk with us with the love that we learn, we demonstrate, and we engage each and every day of our lives as the beloved kingdom, the reign of God, the kingdom of God here on earth, whatever terminology we're using. Couple of minutes for questions, and I will preface everything, which I am on a journey and I'm still learning. And there are folks in here that probably know more about King and have maybe worked with King in your lives. So I acknowledge that. So I won't have answers to all your questions, maybe, but I love conversation. What? Go ahead.
Well, first of all, how could you get the PowerPoint presentation? Or how could we get the PowerPoint presentation? So,
Yeah. In many ways, we kind of protect that intellectual
okay,
because of what we do in our 16 hours is a lot of this, just expanding it. Stanford University has a lot of Martin Luther King stuff on their website.
It looks like too, Jason's recording it.
Right,
So you can
so,
go back to the recording.
right.
okay.
You can go back,
Yeah,
yes.
we'll go back.
And I will ask Matt, who I work with, whether or not I can give you the slides that I've used. And if he gives me permission, I will get those to Jason. But yes, this is being recorded so that you can go back and view this again and again. Or you can invite us to do a 16-hour workshop.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But I do have one other observation. Back in 2016, I went to vote.
Uh-huh.
And I was engaging with a friend and so forth, who's an elected representative.
Mhm.
And I said, well, if Hillary loses, okay, so be it. You know, you accept it. At least some people accept loss. Other people don't accept loss.
Uh-huh.
And the one observation he made to me, no compromise. How do you live in a world where certain people say no compromise? Because you have people over here, you have people over here, and you cannot get them to negotiate because they say no compromise.
And my question is why? What's behind that no compromise? Is it fear that they're going to lose who they are? Is it fear that their beliefs are not going to be valued? I think one of the things we miss when we go to no compromise is we lose the tension that really helps us move forward better. I think, because if I can be in conversation with someone I don't agree with, that individual, that methodology, that thought can transform my life. And if I'm afraid that what I engage will change me, then I need to be changed. You know, if I can't center myself in my own faith, I did that with as I was engaging Muslims and Sikhs and Hindu, all of that in the San Diego area. I had to realize that I have to be confident in my Christian faith and my Christian faith, not somebody else's Christian faith, not the Christian faith that I was taught, but the Christian faith that I embody now. And if I can be confident in that, then I'm not as threatened by what comes at me. I mean, I was fascinated to find the values that interrelate in all religions, in all faiths. I'm sitting back going, whoa, Jesus is alive. I mean, I wouldn't say that necessarily to a Sikh or my Muslim friends, but I might, depending on my relationship. Go ahead.
Well, tying into that, St. James in Lancaster City. Now they're wrapping up the Hindu, but that is what they have brought to that community. They did big part on Islam, Judaism, Buddhism, and like the first two parts, I've just been in the Hindu part, is like the writings and the similarities. And now this last part, we're going to be looking at how that with Christianity, but they've done that it's under their urban well approach that you need to learn, and then you find the similarity between the religions and
yeah. if I'm doing social justice, I want to do it with the Sikhs and the Muslims. Because they have an amazing social justice theory if you're, depending on who you're working with. Go ahead.
What have you learned, when you got fired?
Uh-huh.
In the sense that the Church of Brothers polity is that if you have 2/3 vote or whatever,
Mhm.
it goes to a vote and then it's over. What have you learned in that process, in using this methodology?
Well, I wasn't familiar with this when I was there. So but in order to connect the two, what I think where I see the connection is principle 4, accept the suffering without retaliation for the sake of the goal, for the sake of the cause to achieve the goal. I think my firing allowed that congregation and that district to see something different that they had not seen before. And I think my firing was prophetic in many ways. But for me, it was an amazing ability to witness to that community that really believed Satan had me by the throat. And I was following, the best I could. And I tried to turn that on them and invite them to think about how their relationships and their evils and their Satan was affecting them. So it was an amazing, as I look back on it now, and as I worked through that, it took a lot of years because I was pretty pissed, to say it bluntly. But as I reflect on that, I truly believe God was at work. For them, 1, to see a woman, 2, to see someone in the district stand up and say, if you're going to fire me, fine, do it. That doesn't change me. Sent me into a crisis, probably deconstructed my faith a little bit, but it brought me back stronger. And that's, I think, what I learned. The other thing I learned is the gay community is amazing. They are so amazing in support. I was so supported by that gay community that today I could go back. Most of them are probably dead because that was the time of AIDS. But I could go back to that community. They would remember me and we could still celebrate together. We had the biggest party. The congregation didn't appreciate it, but what are you going to do? I'm fired.
Right.
So.
I gotta steal Sarah because it's.
Oh, that's okay. I'm worship leading.
But thank you. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.